Welcome to the Explosive Street Podcast with Jared Bittney. In this episode, I'm going to talk about my last trip to Westside Barbell to see Louie Simmons. To tell him thank you, because if it were not for Louie and Westside Barbell, Explosive Mechanics and I would not be where we're at today. And so for those of you who don't know, Louie's been referred to as the godfather of powerlifting. He totaled elite in 5 different weight classes for over 4 decades, one of only 5 people to ever do it. He was regularly featured in Powerlifting USA. He owned and operated Westside Barbell, the world's strongest gym, for decades. At 50 years old, Louie squatted 920, benched 600, deadlifted 772 pounds. He had several inventions. He invented the plyo swing, the belt squat, and most notably, the reverse hyper. He invented the reverse hyper after breaking his back 3 times and still wanting to train. Joe Rogan had even talked about the reverse hyper on his podcast and how it helped his back. Many college and NFL teams have a reverse hyper. And Louie was also a strength consultant for many college and NFL teams. Buddy Morris, a longtime NFL strength coach, even lived with Louie for a while. Louie was Westside Barbell, and Westside Barbell was Louie. Westside Barbell popularized the Conjugate system using a mix of Soviet and Bulgarian methods. Louie also popularized the use of adding chains and bands to bars in the bench, squat, and deadlift. Although Westside Barbell was an invitation-only gym, visitors were allowed to come visit and see what they were doing. Louie welcomed them with open arms. And every time I ever went to Westside Barbell, Louie had a morning crew and he had an afternoon crew. Now, he was taking care of those powerlifters. He would buy them equipment. He would buy extra equipment and bring it into the gym. He would buy them briefs, squat suits, whatever it took to get them in the gym and get motivated. But in turn, those guys had to dedicate their life and their time to the gym. Many people drove 3 or more hours one way just to get to the gym. Now, Louie had 4 lifting days. He had 2 speed days, 1 for bench, 1 for squat. He had 2 max effort days, 1 for bench and 1 for squat. On Sunday, they did a speed bench or dynamic effort bench. Monday was a max effort squat. Wednesday was a max effort bench, and Friday was a speed squat. So they're lifting Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And if one of those athletes ever missed, they were out. They were no longer part of Westside Barbell because it was an invitation only. So you have to kind of earn your right to get in there. But Louie spending so much time and effort trying to take care of those athletes. I think at one point he was spending $50,000 a year helping run Westside Barbell, or just fund Westside Barbell. He was getting his fundings from, he wrote books, he had videotapes, he sold equipment. So he had money coming in, but it was costing him just to have the gym because he was chasing those numbers. And if those guys were not willing to dedicate their life in order to help Louie get those numbers and use his knowledge, you're out of the club. So, like I said, he popularized the Conjugate system versus Western periodization. So Conjugate system is being ready at all times. You'd often hear Louie on his podcast talk about being ready. And he said they can go to competition any day, anytime, anywhere. And speaking of his podcast, Louie had mentioned me in the gym on his Westside Barbell podcast, like in episode 10. The title is Max Effort and Dynamic Effort Methods for Lower Body. At the 1 hour and 41 minute mark, you can hear me where he talks about me. And again, in episode 46, the origins of the Conjugate method and Westside Barbell. He talked for me from about 38 to the 41 minute mark. And there, so episode 10 was done in 2016 and episode 46 was done in 2021. So Louie had known, I've been talking to Louie since about 2002. And at one point, he even told me I was crazy. I had a 10-year-old deadlift triple body weight in a powerlifting competition. And so I guess I made an impression earlier on in the days with Louie, and I would call him and talk and visit with him over the years, just try to learn about strength. Not necessarily copying, I'll get in that later, but the Conjugate system, you're bringing forth, you're working on your endurance, you're working on your absolute strength, and you're working on your rate of force development all the time. So you got your dynamic effort, you got your maximum effort, and you got your endurance or your hypertrophy method. And so with those 3 methods, you're pretty much tackling everything at one time. Now, for like most people, even most of these high schools nowadays, they still do Western periodization, where you have an endurance phase, an intensity phase, a competition phase, and a recovery phase, to where you'll see the high schools, they'll go for several weeks where they're doing sets of 10 to 12 reps. Then they're going for weeks where they're doing 6 to 8 reps. And then they're going several weeks later on down the road, a couple months, maybe 3 months later, they're doing sets of 3 to 5. So by the time they're getting several months down the road to where they're doing sets of 3 to 5, like month 3, they're starting to lose characteristics they gained in month 1. And so, like I said, periodization, over time, you're trying to develop these qualities, but by the time you get to your strength and power phase, you're losing some of your endurance, and by the time you get in your endurance, you're going to start losing your strength and power, with the conjugate system, like Louie said, ready at all times, because they're always working on the rate of force development. They're always working on the repetition method, and they're always working on the maximum effort method, repetition, kind of endurance and things like that, hypertrophy and things. So, like I said, they're ready at all the time. Now, where I think a lot of people get conjugate training confused is you're bringing up these special strengths and keeping them elevated at all times versus, like I said, where Western periodization is, like the high schools do. They'll start high and work their way down the hill to where they're working on endurance, kind of more hypertrophy, and then strength and power. They're losing characteristics as they're going downhill. So that's when you hear people say, like, I'm going to do a peaking cycle. Or, hey, how do you peak for this event? Well, if you're using conjugate system, you don't have to worry about peaking. You're always ready to go. And where it gets confusing, like people think conjugate is the use of special bars and that. No, Louie used special bars to bring up weak points. And most of the time you hear him talk about the 80-20 rule. Only 20% of the lifts they did, so if they did 5 lifts, only one of those lifts was barbell, the other 4 lifts in that workout were special exercises. He was using the main lift to keep the main lift, to keep the groove. He was working on a rate of force development by doing speed bench, and he was doing maximum effort method the other day to keep the neuromuscular system excited in order to retain strength, and he was using the special bars and special exercises as the accessories in order to bring up the weak points to help the bench or help the squat or the deadlift. So he was also a big believer in Perelpin's chart, and because it talked about lifting optimally and not maximally all the time. So Perelpin's chart gives you a percentage of your 1 rep max. It gives you reps per set. It gives you total reps and a range of reps. So like if you're lifting in the 90% range, reps per set, 1 to 2, optimal total reps is 7, or range of reps of 4 to 10. Now on their dynamic effort day, they were in the 55 to 70% range, which they were doing 3 to 6 reps per set, an optimal of 24 reps, or a range of reps from 18 to 30. So if you look at their dynamic effort day for their speed squat, they would do anywhere between 10 sets and 12 sets of 2. Well, 10 sets of 2 is 20, and that rep range 18 to 30. So we got 18 to 30 rep range. And for their dynamic effort day, they were doing, for squatting, they were doing 10 to 12 sets 2. Optimal total for what Perelpin chart said was 24. So 12 times 2 is going to be 24. And the 10 sets of 2, 10 times 2 is 20. And he falls within the rep range. And for their speed bench, they would often do 9 sets of 3, which is 27, which still falls below the 30 in that rep range. So he kind of used Perelpin's chart to kind of structure how many reps they were doing on max effort day and how many reps he was doing on dynamic effort day. And so for what I found with the gym, Perelpin's chart is a little weak for my athletes because I've got younger athletes. He was dealing with more seasoned athletes and that had much higher training age. My people, like I told Michael Fahey when he interviewed me several years ago, is that basically the kids I train are on steroids. They're at the optimal growth hormone. They're at their optimal testosterone. Well, for my teenagers, my little kids are not. These athletes have the ability to recover much quicker than most people. So I get young kids with the ability to recover. And if I can add these strengths to them, I can get kids. I had this past year, I had 5 or 6 baseball kids that don't even really used to train. they went up 100 pounds on their bench press within 6 to 7 months. And some of them were football players, a lot of them were baseball players. My football players can get some big time jumps too. And they're working out at school. So you got these football players, they'll go to school, they'll work out, and then after school they're coming to meet in order to get the gains. People say, is that too much? No, it's not too much, because I've had a high school freshman and a high school junior. The freshman was coming to me, the junior was not. Well, they both started off at the beginning of the semester with I think a 245, 255 bench, somewhere in that range. And at the end of the semester, the high school junior went from a 245 to 265 bench in a semester. 245, 265. And that freshman that started off the exact same thing as he did, if they started off at 245, that freshman at the end of the semester benched 315. So the junior said, what the hell are you doing? So guess what? That junior started coming to me because he was trying to get ready to go play D1 football. And how in the hell is a freshman going to get bigger gains than me? So that when he got there, we went from 265, I think, to 330 fairly quickly. And so sometimes I had another kid at another high school, he played linebacker. He came to me his last semester of high school. And he came to me with a 260, 265 bench. Within 3 months was at 330. And so it's like, they don't understand. They think they're getting at school, but what they're getting at school, they may be getting that Western periodization to where they're not really developing all strength levels at one time. And so if I'm still getting, I had five sophomores bench 315. They're going to school, coming and training with me. And so one of these kids have been training so long, they'll go to school, they'll go to weight training. They'll go to spring practice, 2 weeks of spring practice, and after spring practice, still come to the gym because they're scared to lose their gains once they've achieved them. And for people that don't know what they're getting, I guess they just don't know what they don't know, so they're kind of left in the dark. So I hope that gives people an idea who Louie was. Westside Barbell, he strongest gym in the world for decades. And if it was not for Louie and his teachings, I wouldn't be where I'm at today, okay? So, how did I get to introduce to Louie? I got introduced to Louie in 2002. I was playing football for the University of Memphis, and this guy, his name was Chris Moore, Barbell Buddha. He used to be on Barbell Shrug podcast way back in the day. He passed away, sadly, in 2016. But he was like, Bidney, quit doing that bodybuilding shit. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? And I was probably about 205 pounds. I benched 365 as a college freshman at 205 pounds. And I was really lean, and I was like, what the hell is this kid talking about? Like, leave me alone. I trained myself to get the 365 bench, so I just kind of thought I knew everything, you know. And I tell Emily at the gym all the time, the Dunning-Kruger effect. The little you know, the more you think you know, and the more you know, the less you feel like you actually do know. So, and I get these baseball dads or these parents come, they had high school weight training, so they think they know stuff of what I'm doing at the gym. Well, they've had little exposure, so they think they know a lot. I've had a lot of exposure and hesitant to even say some things sometimes because I feel like I don't know. So the more you learn, the less you know, or you feel like you know, and the less you know, the more you feel like you know. So it's kind of a odd phenomenon. So anyway, we called him Sluggo. Sluggo's, Benny, quit benching, quit bodybuilding. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? And so he gave me these VHS tapes with Westside Barbell. I didn't know anything about Louie or Westside Barbell, so he gave me these VHS tapes, and I took them home over Christmas break, and I watched them. And so then I started learning, in the video, I started learning how to put chains. I didn't have chains. I bought some bands from Elite FTS. I put bands to the bar. So I went home over Christmas break. I started speed benching. I started kind of following the Westside Barbell way. We had I was doing a max effort day. I was doing a speed bench day. I was trying to copy what they were doing at Westside. And so when I popped those tapes in, Louie was talking about all kind of physics. He was talking so fast, I didn't understand what the hell he was saying, but it was all about numbers, physics, and barbells. I was like, no clue. And I like physics because you can always apply physics and kinesiology to the body if you've had that long enough to understand what to do in the weight room. and get your ass through college too, because your body's basically a cheat sheet once you start learning physics and stuff. It's all, and if you can apply that to the weight room, it makes life so much easier. And so sent me those tapes, and I went home for Christmas break, started speed benching and kind of following that stuff. And the most I've ever done 225 in my life, I was still a freshman. And as an incoming freshman, I had 25 times. Go home, start speed benching, start doing all that stuff. And when I got back to Memphis, the first thing they did in the spring semester was to test our 225 bench again. And I benched it 31 times. I went up 6 reps. When I first started pumping out the bar, I was like, man, this feels so light, because I was used to having that band resistance. That band taught me how to move the bar quicker. And what I learned over time is you got an hourglass. And so you take that hourglass, you flip that upside down. And so if I was moving the bar slower, that sand's running out at the same pace, no matter which pace I move that bar. So once the hourglass is done, that's when your reps start. So what I did, as I learned how to move the bar much quicker, allowed me to get a few more reps out within the same period of time. And so I was like, yeah, that's pretty good. And so then did that in the spring semester, right when we got back in January. And then Sluggo was going to go to the Arnold Classic, and he was going to go visit Louie. I said, I want to go. And he said, no. I said, yes, I want to go. So go to the Arnold Classic, and I begged him enough to, hey, let's go see Louie. And finally, we drove out to the gym, got to introduce to Louie, talked to him for a little bit, come back. Louie was always open to phone calls to talk and do whatever. So I'd call, ask him questions and things. And I visited the gym in 2002, again in 2005. And in 2008, I was on a family vacation, and I took all the kids up there. I wanted Louie to meet the wife and kids, and for them to see the gym and welcome them, and spent some good time there. He was watching the kids do some things on the Nordics and other things, and he was pretty impressed. But then I didn't go back to 2011, because Louie always, I need you to come up here and stay a few days. I need you to come up here and stay for a few days. And what I did is I went up there, I stayed. The first day we did a dynamic squat. It was not so dynamic. It was 45, it was 135, 185, 225, 275. It's almost like a game of dodgeball. When you can't keep going, you're out, or whatever you would want to put an analogy with that. So 135, 185 was just basically flopping 45s and 25s until we get to a certain point. And he made me put on these briefs. And what I learned is I don't know how much band tension on them we had, but it was pretty brutal. That's the first time I ever messed up my SI joint. What happened is like when you're talking about Louie and Westside, they always lifted with gear, which means they lifted with briefs, squat suits, bench shirts, or something like that, in order, because they were trying to lift as much weight as possible. So they're using this gear and things in order to do that. And so when I went there, Louie made me put on briefs and a belt. And traditionally, we don't squat with a belt. We don't squat with briefs or anything at the gym. And so what I learned was tweaking my back. My back was the weak point. So then at that point, you'd get exercises in order to increase that weakness, but someone else may have a weakness somewhere else, and they were given that for whatever they were needing to do. And so getting introduced to Louie and visiting all those visits, and that was in the morning, came back that afternoon, and he brought me a bag full of shirts. And he said, I have some in there for you, something for your wife and something for your kids. I didn't even ask, and Louie went and brought all that stuff to the gym. Very generous and very giving, like I said earlier. And at that point, we didn't have, I didn't have an iPhone at that time, and so I rented a car, and I didn't know how to get back to the airport, and my flight was getting ready to come. I said, Lou, I don't know how to get to the airport. He said, well, get in your car, and I'll escort you there. And when I point over here, that's where you get off, and you'll be at the airport. So Louie left the gym with powerlifters in there to escort me to the airport, which I thought was pretty cool. So Louie was kind of always been there and trying to learn. And if you've listened to his podcast, he was always asking people how they're using this stuff. And I'll get into that. But so how I got introduced to Louie was through a friend that gave me his tapes to tell me to quit bodybuilding. And then once I learned and my strength went up like that, I wanted to learn more, because at that point I didn't feel like I learned anything. And the more I learned, the less I thought I even knew. So I kept digging and I kept digging, and that's kind of what happened. And so now, what did I learn from Louie? He read the right books. I got a degree in human performance exercise science from the University of Memphis. And the good thing about the University of Memphis, when I was there, it was performance based. Like static stretching would decrease bench press performance. Static stretching would decrease this. Hey, this will increase power output. So we were more concerned at Memphis with strength and power. Like at the University of Georgia at that time, they were going towards like how to exercise someone that had been injured in a car wreck or paralyzed. And so by me going to Memphis just to play football, I didn't even know what exercise science was. And for the story of the exercise science, I went to Memphis to play football. I didn't even have a declared major. I didn't know what the hell I was doing besides just being an athlete. And another thing where Sluggle helped me out is I was walking around the University of Memphis. I had to bench. I don't know what day it was. It was a bench day for me, so I had to go bench. And I went to our complex where we did football, where football weight room was, couldn't get in. Went to men's basketball, couldn't get in. Went to the campus recreation center. Everything was closed. I don't even know what freaking day. I don't know what the hell was happening today. It was a holiday or whatever. So I was searching all over campus because there was no local gyms anywhere close to the university. And so I walked on campus and I went to where the girls play basketball. And I said, let me go here. And I walked downstairs and down this hall, and Chris Sluggo was coming out of this door, and I saw a rack. I said, I gotta go bench. He said, you can't go in there. I said, why not? I said, there's a rack. He said, it's not a weight room, it's a lab. I said, what kind of lab? He said, exercise science lab. So that's how I found exercise science. So I guess I need to be thanking Chris for being there, because I was always in search for lifting, but it led me to exercise science, led me to Louie Simmons, and here we are today. And I've read more books because Louie said read the right books. And school's preparing us for more of the health field, going to physical therapy, going towards nursing and stuff like that, because you're using exercise science in that day to either project you into nursing or to get into nursing school or to project you to get you into physical therapy. And so that was more the curriculum, but the professors were more interested in strength and power and stuff that I was introduced to. So you still had to have motor learning, exercise physiology, 1 and 2, kinesiology, physics, and all those things. So they didn't have science and practice strength training. They didn't have science and sports training. They didn't have super training. And I've gone through college campuses through the years. I've gone to Tennessee, Georgia, Kentucky, and all these things, and they're not having these books available. So you're in college, you may be getting your exercise science degree, but if you're not reading the science and practice training, if you're not reading super training, if you're not reading these books, you're kind of leaving a lot of knowledge on the table. And so I'm going to be doing more of a learning series with my podcast to try to help people understand these books, because now I've gotten so much older and a lot more experience that I can now say, no, this is wrong in the book. You know, when you first read, you're like, oh man, that's so new and insightful that you think everything's right. Sometimes everything's not always right, because it's going to be more practical and not so much applied. So Louie introduced me into reading which books. And so like I started reading his books. So he told me about science, practice, and strength training. He told me about science and sports training. He told me about explosive power and jumping ability, and some others. But I also read Louie's books and the stuff he did. And I watched his videos. And in his books, he talked about the books he read. So guess what? I read the books that he read to help me better understand what was going on as overall bigger picture. And also what I learned from Louie is, when reading the books, think about what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish. So when I'm reading science, practice, strength training, when I'm reading the old Soviet text, or when I'm reading all the books that I have read, I'm thinking about how it applies to my athletes at the gym. How am I going to get a sprint result from it? How am I going to get a good vertical jump result from it? How am I going to get a bigger bench? How am I going to get stronger? What is this strength doing to me? Am I getting am I increasing the strength of my ligaments and tendons? Am I increasing my rate of force development? And I'm trying to think of it that way. Like I have gone through and indexed every time super training talks about vertical jump, explosive power, explosive strength, speed, strength, speed. The index or the back of the books don't always go to everywhere it mentions those things in the book. It's not covered in the index. So what I've done is I've created my own index so I can refer back to it to understand what context it's talking in order to better translate to everybody else, so that I can better help someone else understand what's going on. Because if you've never read these books, you can look like a monkey doing a math problem, because they can get really confusing really quick. And what I've noticed about a lot of people is they'll skip around the book and don't really read the whole damn thing. And so what I'll do is I'll read from chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, and I read it front to back. I highlight stuff, and then I go back and read the highlights. If you highlight as you read, you will get a better understanding of what you just read, and it will retain more in your brain, so that now you can recall it. Okay, this happened here. Okay, now, oh, I read this in Science of Sports Training. Well, the Science of Practice Strength Training says this. Well, super. Oh, now you got the try. You can start tying ends together and creating your own sentences and your own thing. So when reading books, think about what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish. Me, trying to build stronger, faster, higher athletes. Louie was trying to build powerlifters. If you're trying, whatever you're trying to, if you're trying to read a book and you're worried about the fitness or the health and fitness industry, we may read the same book, but we may have a different outcome based off what you're doing. If you're just reading a book to read it, you're kind of leaving a lot on the table. And so now you got to read the right books. Number 2, you got to think about what you're doing when you're reading the books. And number 3, you got to test the books. Do what the books say. Test it. Is it working? If it's not, throw it out the window. Or, oh, this book didn't say, but this book said this. And this, oh, now I can create my own sentence. And so they're taking a sentence out of this book and a sentence out of this book. I can take bits and pieces. Although we're in the same wheelhouse, we'll have a different understanding if we reword the same sentence. So, test the books. Now create your own system. Create your environment. And so what I've learned from Louie is read the right books. When reading, think about what you're doing. Number 3, test the books. Number 4, create your own system, your own environment. Break records. Keep track of what you're doing. Because if you can keep track of what you're doing, you know that you have a system that's working. Okay? So that's what I've learned from Louie. And so number 4, so my whole list here: who is Louie and Westside Barbell, how I got introduced to Louie, what I learned from Louie. Number 4 is what I noticed from my visits. Like I said, I visited Westside Barbell 2002, 2005, 2008, 2011, and again in 2021. And like I said, dynamic, I think that sticks in my head the most. Dynamic was not so dynamic. You put on plates until you can't lift no more, then you set off to the side where everybody else finishes. And so after everybody finishes, they kind of like spread out. It's not like you do in college, where it's more like or high school, or maybe even middle school nowadays, where it's more ran like a drill sergeant. Boom, 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 boom. A, B, C, D. Well, I may can skip B because that's not my weak point. I need to go C, D, and E, depending on where I'm at. So that's kind of where, like when Michael Fahey visited the gym, Michael Fahey, Westside Film, he created a movie, Westside versus the World. He also created OVR. He also has numerous, he worked for NFL Films. He's got a lot of experience, a lot of things under his belt. And so, Burn the Ladders. So you got Michael Fahey, same thing. Westside Film, Burn the Ladders, OVR. He's kind of all behind the scenes of a lot of stuff. So if you get a chance, go check out the movie Westside vs. the World, because it will give you a better understanding of Louie versus what I just gave you. I know who he is. I know what he's taught me, and my thing is to pass it on to others. And so what I noticed about my visits there is Louie took care of the people, but the people needed to take care of the gym, which means he had always constantly break records. And if you didn't, you're out. But if you're not a member like me, he wanted me to kind of pass on and learn. But more importantly, I think, is that he was trying to teach me in hopes that I would turn around and teach him, hey, how are you using this knowledge? What are you doing with this? And so the fifth thing I wrote down here is my last visit there. What did we talk about? Well, we ate lunch, and I just wanted to tell him, thank you, Louie. If it was not for you, I would not be where I'm at today. And so I was able to tell Louie that. I showed him the results I've gotten. I showed him my strength results. I showed him my jump results. And I also talked to Louie about squat ratios and sprint times. You know, the strength results. I had a 10-year-old, like I said, Louie, remember you having that 10-year-old that deadlift 3 times body weight? Yeah, he said, that's crazy. And so, I mean, me and Louie talked about everything. We talked about politics. We talked just about life in general. We liked the same music. He had Waylon playing on in his car. He liked fast cars. Picked me up in a brand new AMG Mercedes and stepped on it. So we had to eat Mexican. Did not take pictures. I didn't take pictures of my last visit with Lou. I had pictures and stuff like that from before and where I didn't go up there to social media publicize or whatever. So basically just go, Lou, thanks. And here's what I've done with what you have taught me. You know, 10-year-old 3 times body weight deadlift. I've had 4 teams to squat 600 plus pounds. I've had 16 high school athletes to bench 405 plus pounds. And at that time, so that was some strength results, and I was trying to show them some other things. And the jump results, at that time I had 38 athletes. 38 high school athletes that have jumped 40 plus inches in the vertical. And Louie would love jumping. He loved box jumps. And I had not running jump. At one time, I had the highest female box jump in the country. I had a female jump on a 49-inch box with no pre-run. Stand, boom, explode. And so that was impressive. You know, like I said, he's mentioned me on his podcast before. And in that one podcast, he said, I don't mention a lot of, everybody mentions Westside Barbell. Westside Barbell don't mention a lot of people. But Lou said, again, I talk about Jared. And, you know, because he said people don't have credentials. They've not done anything. And so over the years, you know, I showed him my squat ratios. I said, if an athlete squats this in a box squat, I said, Louie, I'm not Westside Barbell. You're a student just like me. And I think this is what I've learned over the years about you is that you're always teaching me and all these other people, but they're never teaching you of how they use the system. What they're doing is they're telling you how they're replicating what you're doing for what they're doing, but that's not really teaching because you already know all that. And I said, we don't do speed squats. Our jumps are our dynamic effort. We don't do speed bench. We do like if you box squat, we pause bench. So that will increase rate of force development and absolute strength, but we don't do speed bench at lower percentages because the bar moves too fast to create tension. So if we're not creating tension, we're not gonna create strength. And that's what I told him about the squats. I said, we squat at 0.6 meters. I said, our thing we're chasing is what we squat at 0.6 meters. So if you weigh 300 pounds, you're gonna take, well, if you squat 315 and you weigh 195, you're gonna take 315 divided 195, and that will give you your ratio. And I said, whatever that ratio is, I said, if that's 1.4 times your body weight, you're gonna run a 5 flat 40. If it's 1.5, you're gonna run a 4 9 40. If it's 1.6, you're gonna run a 4 8. If it's 1.7, you're gonna run a 4 7. And I showed him that whole list of all these athletes at different body weights. Like this past week at the gym, I had a kid, he weighed 200, he squatted 335 at a 6. And he weighs 200 pounds. And he said, Jared, I'm gonna run a 4 7. I said, you're not strong enough. He said, you don't know who I am. I said, you don't know who I am. And so his ratio was a 1.6. So I told him he needs to be a 1.7. I said, so you need to be squatting 355 at least a 0.63 in order to run a 4.7. And so at the end of this month, he ran a 4. He squatted 335. So he was at 1.6 something times his body weight, which is not quite to the 1.7 to run that. And so he ran a 4.87 and a 4.88. And I said, I told you, it's mathematics and physics. That's what Louie taught. The gym's mathematics and physics. So I told him that we used a box squat to chase this. He said, 0.6. He said, no, 0.8. I said, Lou, 0.6. I said, 0.8, the bar's moving too fast to create tension. If the bar's moving too fast to not create tension, you're not going to create strength. You have to be in a perfect strength speed number area. I said 0.8 is too fast, even if you add bands to the bar. So he said, yeah, that's why I increased the percentage. Okay, so I had to I had to explain all that to Lou in order to tell Lou it's actually 0.6, it's not 0.8 because of the bar speeds. And so then after telling him all that, he said, yeah, that's why I increased it. So we actually slowed the bar down to create better results. But at that time I was teaching him and him not teaching me anymore. And so that's kind of what I wanted to do with that. And I said, like I said, we don't do speed squats, we do dumbbell jumps. And we do brief maximum tension when I squat. We got younger athletes, our training age is different. And so I can squat them 3 days a week now. I can bench them 3 days a week. And I get their bench to go up 15 to 20 pounds per month, every month, if they listen and do it the right way. And so it will show them this improvement, this improvement, this improvement. And so he was really impressed. He said, it only matters that you have a system. And so being able for me to go back and teach Lou after all the years that he taught me, I was thankful for, because that was in the fall of 2021, and I think he died in March of 22, I think it was. I know he died on March 24th. I know that. I think it was 22, but anyway, that's all I want to do. Is I just wanted to take time to go up there and tell Lou thank you for what he done. So, and our conversation, so after talking to him, showing him, he took me by his warehouse. He showed me around, and he started going down these aisles and picking out shirts and throwing, what size are you? I said, Louie's given me plenty of shirts and all kind of stuff back in the day. And I said, Lou, you've given me enough. I don't need anything. If you don't tell me your size, I'm just going to start throwing all kind of shit in the bag. I said, okay. And I told him my size, and he filled up the bag full of shirts and asked me if I wanted anything else. And I said, no, I didn't go up there to take anything. I wanted to give thanks. And so he was still trying to give. And so he gave me his last book, and I brought it here, so I won't forget it. His last book was called The Iron Samurai. And in the book, he wrote, Jared, a true Westsider, Louie. And so, because I told him I'm not Westside Barbell. But I guess to me at that point, Westsider means a man of innovation with a system. And so I was able to take Lou and teach Lou, and I don't know if a Westsider is a teacher. So I'm trying to still comprehend that. I got the book, never opened it, never read it. Just besides that first page, I actually have that book there. And if you're watching on YouTube, I got 2 copies, because the one that Lou gave me, I'm gonna keep in pristine condition, and I bought another one so I can read it. So still not read the one that he gave me, but like I said, it's a story about his life. And I'm tell you again, Michael Fahey, Westside Film. Michael Fahey burned the ladders. He created the film Westside versus the World. If you've not had a chance, watch it. It'll give you a good insight of Louie, what he's done and who he's impacted. He's impacted Ed Cohn. He's impacted most, like I said, the Godfather of powerlifting. If you know anything about strength training, you've probably heard of Westside Barbell, Louie Simmons. And so if you've not, you're probably not at a level that you think you are. So anyway, I said, Lou, and at the end of the day, I asked him this earlier on. I said, Lou, why don't people care about results? And Lou said, I don't give a F what they care about. And he didn't say F, he said the real deal, if you ever know Lou. Lou, I was riding in a car one year with Lou, and he was drinking cough syrup riding down the road, honking his horn, get the hell out of my way. We were driving a Ford Excursion at that time, big ass car, and just drinking cough syrup, and took us out to eat lunch that day, and we went somewhere for pizza. So like I said, Louie was very giving with knowledge. But if you were a member of that gym, you dedicate yourself to break records, keep records, get in there, be better than you were last time. And that's kind of, and then once, I don't treat the kids at the gym like a drill sergeant. And I think that's what Michael Fahey was trying to get at when he was there, is he's visited me several times too, is we all come in, I let the kid, they got to know their own bench rest breaks. Louie didn't sit in there like use a whip or anything to get them in. Louie stood there and watched, just like I do. I can't make them, if you don't want to squat 500 pounds, if you don't want to squat 135, you're not going to do it. And so, lucky for me, I got the kids at the gym that want to be there. My online clientele is growing fast. I've got a kid, like I had Joseph on the podcast a few months ago. He jumped a 40-inch vertical from a 28.5-inch vertical. Owen in Oregon, his bench from 170 to 285, I believe, in a year. We're going to try my best to get him to bench 315. One of Owen's friends, Howie, signed up. And Howie started off at 170 first month, next month 200, next month 225. So I'm chucking off 20 pounds per month off of that guy. And so I had another kid at Arkansas jump a 30 with 30s before. It's kind of crazy. And I got another kid, Xavier. He started off at 115. Now he's at 170 bench. And so I got another kid, Case. He's in, I think, Montana. He was not able to even touch the bottom net. Now we're at the rim. So very thankful for those guys trusting me with their process and everything else, allowing me to help them. And I'm trying to help my online people just like I do the people at the gym. And my online thing is I got an app, and I've got my own explosive mechanics exercise demonstration videos in there to show them what to do, how I would do it. And I prescribe the sets reps for sometimes the press downs I do, some people I do, some people I don't. Once they get stuck, I will. But I try to get minimum effective dose. I try to get them as good as I can without giving them everything under the table. And so it's not a whole lot of exercises. Louie only did about 5 to 6 lifts. That's all it really takes. You don't have to go in there, kill yourself like a bodybuilder for 8 to 10 different exercises. We're going to be high frequency, get in, boom, come back. Boris Reko, whatever, the famous Russian power coach, he said to bench a lot, you got to bench a lot. And at one point I was benching 6 days a week, 5-6 days a week, I think it was. So, but the volume and loads and everything else changed based off of what you're trying to truly accomplish. For me at the gym, I'm trying to get the kids jump high as I can. I was able to tell Louie in 2017, I had the number 1, the number 7, and the number 9 guy, highest vertical jump kids in the country. 3 in the top 10, 7 in the top 50, and 11 in the top 100, all out of explosive mechanics. So, anyway, thank you all for watching. Thank you for listening. This episode was dedicated to Louie and Westside Barbell for what he's done. So glad I was able to tell him thank you. Hope you learned. If you have questions, please feel free to email me at info@explosivemechanics. Reach out to me on Instagram at Explosive Mechanics, Twitter, or now X at Explosive MEC. So anyway, thank you all for watching. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.